Yo, what is up guys? Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. So Oscar Valdez defeats Adam Lopez via a 7th round knockout, and in doing so, he had to get past a scare. He was dropped in this fight fairly early on with an uppercut, and he had some tough moments against an unheralded fighter. You know, Lopez came in at a day's notice because the original opponent missed weight terribly. So Lopez came in on a day's notice with a fairly ordinary record of 13-1, with no real reputation, and he gave Oscar Valdez a really tough fight. Valdez had to get through some tough moments to get this win, and in fact, the stoppage in this fight, in my opinion, was premature. So, you know, Oscar Valdez really didn't pass this test with flying colours. Now, maybe Adam Lopez is one of these fighters where, you know, he was unknown and he was just better than anybody really expected, hence his performance. That is a possibility, no doubt about it. And in fact, watching Adam Lopez, I'm sure he could go on to be a good fringe contender at the very least. So he certainly proved something in the ring against Oscar Valdez, but we have to ask the question, what is wrong with Oscar Valdez? Because on the come up, this guy was a very, very good talent, and a guy who was showing very good potential. You know, Oscar Valdez isn't your typical Mexican fighter. He came into the pro ranks with a decent amateur career. A lot of Mexican fighters don't really have amateur careers. They will turn pro very young, and that's how they learn their trade. Whereas Oscar Valdez isn't that type of fighter. Like I said, he had an amateur career. He fought in the Olympics and he beat some pretty good guys in the amateurs. So Oscar Valdez had a really good base to build from when he turned pro. And, you know, the first couple of years of his pro career were impressive. On the come up, like I said, he was scoring sensational knockouts. He was beating guys up. He was showing strength, punching power, good explosiveness, and just a really, really good upside. And I was always really impressed with Oscar Valdez on the come up. I really liked what I was seeing, and I felt he was a guy who could potentially be an elite level fighter in the future. And I was impressed with Oscar Valdez up until he won his world title. So before he won his world title, he beat good contenders like Chris Avalos and Evgeny Gradovich. He beat those guys in dominating fashion. He won his title against Matias Carlos Adrian Rueda from Argentina. He destroyed him. He made a quick first title defense, looked good in that. But basically, from the Miguel Mariaga fight onwards, for me, Oscar Valdez really hasn't impressed. And if anything, it looks like he's getting worse. He's certainly not improved from his earlier fights. Why is that? Maybe I just overrated his potential. You know, when you look at these prospects coming through, you know, sometimes you see a guy and he looks for the goods, doesn't always pan out. And on the flip side, sometimes you see prospects and they may not look all that great, but they end up being really good fighters. It's always hard to tell, but, you know, Oscar Valdez to me looked like a real threat. And the thing for me that is telling, before he won that title, like I mentioned, he beat guys like Chris Avalos and Evgeny Gradovich, and he beat these guys in pretty destructive fashion. And since he's won that title, he's fought guys on and around that level, and sometimes even lower than that level, and he's looked nowhere near as good beating these guys, to be honest. I mean, Jason Sanchez, for example, Carmine Tamasone as well. These guys are not better than Chris Avalos and Evgeny Gradovich, but Valdez looked really, really poor in these fights. You know, guys like Genesis Cervania and Miguel Mariaga, I would say these guys are comparable to Evgeny Gradovich and Chris Avalos, but again, you know, Valdez just doesn't look as effective, explosive, powerful and strong as he did in his earlier fights. He just doesn't look anywhere near as effective. Maybe that is because the style of fighting that he uses, you know, defensively, Oscar Valdez isn't the best, and that was always the concern I had with him on the come up. You know, if there was a weakness, it was his defense. He does eat a lot of punches. You know, maybe this guy is damaged goods already because, like I've mentioned, don't forget, he actually had a long amateur career as well. So maybe he's got a lot more miles on the clock than we realise. You know, the Scott Quigg fight, for example, looking back, that fight more than likely took a lot out of Oscar Valdez. I mean, he broke his jaw. He took some really big shots against a much bigger man who was a welterweight that night. You know, that was a brutal fight, and arguably the fight of 2018. He won the fight, Valdez. He showed a lot of heart, but maybe that fight in particular has taken a lot out of Oscar Valdez. Maybe there's a chance he's already damaged goods. You know, he's only 28, but like I've mentioned, you know, defensively he's not great. He does get hit, and he's had a long amateur career. Fighters age differently, you know. Everyone's different. Everyone's body's different. Some fighters can take more than others over the length of a career. You know, some fighters deal with punishment better, and they still remain strong in later fights, whereas others deteriorate quicker. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It just is what it is. Maybe the punishment is just catching up with Oscar Valdez. And if that is the case, you know, that's quite a downer, because I still maintain there's a good fighter in there somewhere, you know. I really do believe the guy had ability on the come up, but, you know, in recent fights, in recent months, and even recent years, well, the last 2 years, he's not shown it. So certainly a lot of soul searching for Oscar Valdez. He needs to make some changes, and he really needs to make improvements before somebody takes advantage of his flaws, because it will happen. Trust me on that. You know, maybe a new trainer is needed. I've not really been impressed with the link-up between Oscar Valdez and Eddie Reynoso. I think Eddie Reynoso is a great trainer, to be honest. He's done some great work with Canelo, and I think he's improving Ryan Garcia. I believe Eddie Reynoso is a great trainer, but, you know, just because you're a very good trainer doesn't necessarily mean you can improve all fighters. You know, even someone like Emmanuel Stewart had fighters where he couldn't really get the best out of them, even if they were world class. You know, Prince Naseem, for example, despite Emmanuel Stewart being a great trainer, and obviously Naseem being a very good fighter, those two never really clicked, and it never worked out. Sometimes it works that way. Maybe Valdez and Reynoso is something similar, so, you know, maybe a trainer change for Oscar Valdez could be needed. But we'll see. You know, I hope Valdez makes improvements. I think there's a lot to like about the kid. He's a fun fighter to watch, first and foremost. He's got nuts and guts, you know, as heart as big as anybody in the sport, in my opinion. He's walked through some fire, he's had some tough moments, and he always gets off the canvas and comes back to fight. So the guy's a warrior, but, you know, he really does need to improve technically. And, you know, he needs to make that jump to the next level, because he's not made it. He really hasn't. In fact, I think he's got worse. Like I've said, I think he was much more impressive in his earlier fights and his fights just before the title. He was much more impressive in these fights. So we'll see how it pans out for Oscar Valdez. But right now, I don't believe it's looking too good. You know, why is that? Maybe I just overrated him. Maybe the punishment now is just catching up with him. Or maybe it could be something completely different. We don't really know. But like I said, I hope Valdez can make some improvements. But we'll see, like I've said. But anyway, share your thoughts below on Oscar Valdez. Do you believe he can improve? Has he plateaued? Is he getting worse? Why do you think he's been performing so poorly recently? Share your thoughts below on Oscar Valdez. And also just to note as well, Carl Frampton picked up a win on the undercard. He beat the unheralded prospect Tyler McCreary. He won a 10-round decision. He dropped McCreary a couple of times. And he won a workmanlike decision. He looked okay. But, you know, I believe Carl Frampton has seen better days. But there's still a big fight out there for him, I'm sure. So we'll see where Carl Frampton goes as well. And last but not least, just to mention it, Carlos Adames lost to Patrick Teixeira for the WBO interim super welterweight title. That was a good fight, and Teixeira really surprised me in that one. I was picking Adames to win that. But yeah, decent enough card, some fun fights. And yeah, share your thoughts below. Peace.